When young and ambitious Dr. Zara Kalu returns to her ancestral village in Nigeria, she hopes to make a difference in the community she left behind. But what she finds is a world shrouded in secrets, where power, tradition, and betrayal are intertwined. In the heart of the village stands Chief Adisa, a 75-year-old tribal leader whose benevolent facade masks dark, sinister ambitions. Drawn into a forbidden relationship with the powerful chief, Zara soon discovers she's pregnant. But her shock turns to horror as she uncovers the chilling truth behind her pregnancy and the chief's twisted plans for their unborn child. With the village mysteriously plagued by an illness no one can explain and Chief Adisa's grip tightening, Zara finds herself caught between loyalty to her people and her desperate fight for survival. As she unearths secrets that threaten to destroy everything she holds dear, Zara must race against time to expose the truth before it's too late. In a story of forbidden desire, treacherous alliances, and devastating revelations, The Price of Desire explores how far one woman will go to protect herself, her unborn child, and the community she loves. But in a village where nothing is as it seems, who can Zara trust when the very air she breathes is poisoned with lies? Before we dive into this powerful story, let us know where you're tuning in from, and if you find it compelling, don't forget to hit subscribe. Zara Kalu felt a strange mix of excitement and anxiety as the dusty bus rattled to a stop at the edge of Amaju village. It had been nearly a decade since she last set foot in the place where she was born. The sights, sounds, and scents were familiar, yet somehow different, like a faded photograph coming to life. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm, golden hue over the landscape as the villagers bustled about their evening routines. She took a deep breath, inhaling the rich scent of earth and foliage, and stepped off the bus. The air was thick with the smell of charcoal fires and cooking spices, instantly reminding her of her childhood. Her heartbeat quickened as she scanned the crowd for familiar faces. It had been years since she left for medical school in the city, leaving behind everything she knew, including the painful memories of her mother's untimely death. A chorus of excited voices drew her attention as a group of children rushed toward her, their laughter like music to her ears. "Dr. Zara is back," they cheered, tugging at her hands and clothes. The villagers had always respected her family's lineage, and her return brought an air of anticipation. She smiled warmly at the children, trying to shake off her nerves. Among the crowd stood an older woman with a warm, wrinkled face, Mama Ifeoma, one of the village elders who had been like a second mother to Zara after her own passed away. Mama Ifeoma's embrace was strong, grounding Zara in a way she hadn't realized she needed. "Zara, my child, you've returned to us," Mama Ifeoma said, her voice filled with both joy and relief. "The village needs you now more than ever." Zara nodded, a tight knot of guilt forming in her stomach. She had left the village seeking a better life, yet here she was, drawn back to the place she once couldn't wait to escape. "Thank you, Mama," Zara replied, her voice softer than she intended. "I hope I can make a difference." As they made their way through the village, Zara noticed a few changes. The once bustling market was quieter, and there was a somber air hanging over the villagers. The laughter and energy she remembered from her childhood seemed dulled. Her brow furrowed as she saw the weary faces of the people who passed her by. Many looked malnourished, and a few had the telltale signs of illness, pale skin, sunken eyes, and sluggish movements. "What's going on here, Mama?" "Everyone seems different," Zara asked, her concern evident. Mama Ifeoma sighed deeply, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "A strange illness has taken hold of the village. It started a few months ago, affecting the young and the old alike. The chief has been trying to control it, but—" She trailed off, shaking her head. Before Zara could press for more information, a deep, commanding voice interrupted them. Well, if it isn't our long-lost doctor returning to save us." Zara turned to see Chief Adisa, the towering figure who had been the village's leader for as long as she could remember. He was dressed in a rich, flowing agbada, his presence exuding authority and power. His eyes, however, held an intensity that made Zara uneasy. Chief Adisa, Zara said respectfully, inclining her head. It's good to see you again. The chief's lips curled into a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The pleasure is all mine, Dr. Zara. Your return is indeed timely. The village has been facing difficult times, and your skills are needed. There was something in the way he said it that sent a shiver down Zara's spine. She could feel his gaze lingering on her, as if he were assessing her. It was as if the years hadn't passed, and she was still that young girl trying to stay out of his intimidating presence. But now, she was no longer a child. She was a doctor, capable of making a real difference. I'll do whatever I can to help, Zara replied, her voice steady despite her nerves. Chief Adisa nodded approvingly, though the glint in his eyes suggested something darker. Good. I will personally see to it that you have everything you need to carry out your work. But first, I insist you join me for dinner tonight. We have much to discuss. Before Zara could refuse, Mama Ifeoma gently squeezed her arm, urging her to accept. The chief's invitations were more like commands, and refusing him could make her return more complicated than it needed to be. Of course, Chief Adisa. I would be honored, Zara said, forcing a smile. As the chief walked away, flanked by his guards, Zara turned back to Mama Ifeoma, her concern deepening. What's really going on here, Mama? What are you telling me? Mama Ifeoma shook her head. There are things better left unsaid, my child. The chief has changed over the years. Be careful, Zara. Trust is a rare commodity here. Zara nodded, her mind already racing with questions. What had happened to her once lively village? And what secrets was Chief Adisa hiding behind that charming smile? As she walked toward the small clinic that would become her new workplace, Zara couldn't shake the feeling that she was stepping into something far more dangerous than she had imagined. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the village. The once familiar surroundings now seemed darker, more foreboding. As Zara closed the door to her clinic and began unpacking her supplies, she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that her return to Amaju was not the homecoming she had envisioned. Little did she know, her life was about to take a turn that would entangle her in a web of secrets, forbidden desires, and dangerous revelations that would change her life forever. As night fell, the village of Amaju became eerily quiet. The distant sound of drums echoed from the chief's compound, reminding Zara of the dinner she had reluctantly agreed to attend. But for now, she was focused on her new clinic. The small, dimly lit space had been abandoned for some time, with dusty shelves and cobwebs in the corners. She sighed as she started organizing her supplies, determined to make the place functional again. A sudden knock on the door startled her. Zara turned to see Mama Ifeoma standing in the doorway, her face lined with concern. Zara, my dear, you need to rest. You've had a long journey, Mama Ifeoma said gently, her eyes flickering to the supplies scattered across the room. Zara shook her head. There's too much to do, Mama. I need to get this clinic up and running. If this illness is as bad as you say, I can't waste any time. Mama Ifeoma's face softened with a hint of pride. You've grown into such a strong woman, Zara. But remember, you can't help anyone if you're exhausted. Reluctantly, Zara nodded and set down the bandages she had been arranging. You're right, Mama. I suppose I should get ready for the chief's dinner. The older woman's expression darkened. Be careful, Zara. The chief is not the same man you once knew. He has changed, and not for the better. Zara frowned. What do you mean? What happened while I was gone? Mama Ifeoma hesitated, her eyes darting toward the open door as if afraid someone might overhear. It's better if you find out for yourself. Just don't trust anyone too easily. Zara's mind whirled with questions, but Mama Ifeoma gave her a reassuring pat on the arm before turning to leave. Left alone, Zara took a deep breath, trying to shake off the feeling of unease that had settled in her chest since she returned. She couldn't help but wonder what secrets the village was hiding and how deep Chief Adisa's influence really ran. An hour later, Zara found herself walking up the winding path to Chief Adisa's grand mansion. The compound was illuminated with flickering lanterns, casting a warm glow on the intricately carved wooden doors. The sounds of laughter and clinking glasses echoed from within. As she approached, 2 guards nodded and opened the heavy doors, revealing a scene of opulence. The interior was a striking contrast to the modest homes in the village. Rich tapestries adorned the walls, and the air was filled with the scent of incense and roasted meats. Zara hesitated at the entrance, feeling out of place among the finely dressed guests who were mingling and laughing. She smoothed down her simple dress, wishing she had worn something more fitting for the occasion. "Dr. Zara, you've graced us with your presence," came a deep, familiar voice. Zara turned to see Chief Adisa approaching, a wide smile on his lips. Tonight, he was dressed in a regal blue agbada embroidered with gold, exuding power and confidence. His eyes gleamed as he looked her over, lingering a moment too long on her figure. "Chief Adisa," Zara said with a polite nod, masking her discomfort. "Thank you for the invitation." "Please call me Adisa," he insisted, placing a hand on her lower back and guiding her deeper into the room. His touch was light, yet it sent a chill through her. "I've heard so much about your accomplishments in the city. We are truly fortunate to have you back with us." Zara forced a smile, trying to ignore the intensity of his gaze. "I'm just here to help, Adisa. The villagers are in need, and I want to do what I can." "Ah, always so noble," he said with a hint of mockery in his tone. "But tonight is not for work, my dear. Tonight is for pleasure. Come, have a drink." Reluctantly, Zara accepted a glass of wine from a passing servant. As the evening wore on, she tried to blend in, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time she glanced around, she would catch Adisa's eyes on her, a predatory smile playing on his lips. Finally, she slipped away from the main hall, seeking refuge on the balcony overlooking the village. The cool night air was a welcome relief, and she closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. Finding it a bit overwhelming? Adisa's voice cut through the silence, making her jump. Zara turned to see him standing just a few feet away, a glass in hand. His eyes never left hers as he slowly approached, the moonlight casting shadows across his chiseled features. "I just needed some fresh air," Zara said, trying to keep her tone steady. The proximity of his tall, imposing figure made her heart race. Adisa leaned against the balcony railing, his gaze locked on her. "I can imagine it must be a lot to take in, returning after so many years. But you belong here, Zara. This is your home." His words were smooth, but there was an underlying tension that made Zara uneasy. She took a step back, but he was quick to close the distance between them. "You know, Zara," he continued, his voice dropping to a whisper, "the village needs someone strong, someone who can help guide it into the future. Someone like you." He reached out, his fingers lightly brushing a strand of hair away from her face. Zara's breath hitched at the unexpected intimacy. She tried to pull away, but his touch was strangely magnetic. The wine, the soft music drifting from inside, and the warmth of his breath on her skin seemed to dull her senses. "You are very kind, Chief," she managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. "Kindness has nothing to do with it," he said, his eyes darkening with something far more dangerous. "I recognize potential when I see it, and I am willing to offer you anything you desire." Zara's heart pounded as she realized he wasn't just talking about her medical work. There was something more behind those words, something that both intrigued and terrified her. She needed to leave before she got pulled into whatever game he was playing. "Thank you, Chief Adisa," Zara said, forcing a smile as she took a step back. "But I should really be going." Adisa's smile didn't falter, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "Of course. But remember, Zara, the doors to my mansion are always open to you." As she hurried away, Zara couldn't shake the feeling that she had just stepped into a trap. Whatever was going on in Amaju, it was clear that Chief Adisa was at the center of it. And she was starting to wonder if coming back to the village had been a terrible mistake. The days following the lavish party at Chief Adisa's mansion passed in a blur. Zara threw herself into her work at the clinic, hoping to distract herself from the unsettling encounter on the balcony. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the memory of his intense gaze or the way his touch had sent shivers down her spine. The chief was dangerous, she knew that much. Yet, there was something about him that drew her in, something she couldn't quite explain. Tonight, she found herself back at his mansion, this time at his personal request. She had intended to refuse, but Mama Ifioma had urged her to go, insisting that maintaining good relations with the chief would be beneficial for her work in the village. Reluctantly, Zara agreed, convincing herself that it was merely a professional obligation. The sun had set by the time she arrived. The mansion was bathed in the warm glow of lanterns, casting flickering shadows on the ornate walls. A servant escorted her to an opulent sitting room filled with rich, dark wood furniture and luxurious fabrics. The scent of incense hung in the air, heady and intoxicating. "Dr. Zara, welcome," Chief Adisa greeted her as he entered the room, a charming smile on his lips. He was dressed in a deep red robe, more relaxed than the formal attire he wore at the party. His presence seemed to fill the room, and Zara couldn't help but feel small in his shadow. "Thank you for inviting me, Chief," Zara said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I wasn't sure what this meeting was about." Adisa poured her a glass of wine and offered it to her with a smile that was both inviting and predatory. "I simply wanted to speak with you, in private," he said, his voice smooth and low. "We didn't get much time to talk during the party, and I must admit, you've intrigued me." Zara accepted the glass, her heart beating a little faster. She took a small sip, hoping the wine would calm her nerves. "I appreciate your hospitality, but my time here is dedicated to helping the village. That is my only priority." Chief Adisa moved closer, his eyes never leaving hers. Of course. But even the most dedicated doctors deserve a moment of relaxation, don't you agree?" He leaned in, and Zara could feel the heat of his body, the scent of his cologne enveloping her. It was a rich, heady scent that made her head spin. Trying to maintain her composure, Zara stepped back slightly. "I appreciate the offer, Chief, but—" "Call me Adisa," he interrupted, his voice a husky whisper. "There's no need for formalities between us." He reached out, his fingers lightly grazing her arm. "You're tense, Zara. You work so hard. Allow me to help you relax." Zara's breath hitched. There was something hypnotic about the way he spoke, the way his eyes seemed to pierce right through her. She knew she should leave, that getting too close to him was dangerous. But his touch sent a thrill through her, one she couldn't ignore. "Please sit," he said, guiding her to a plush couch. She allowed herself to be led, her mind clouded by a strange mix of desire and fear. He sat down beside her, close enough that their knees almost touched. "I've seen many strong women in my time," Adisa said, his voice a soft rumble, "but none like you. There's a fire in you, Zara, a passion that I admire." His fingers brushed a strand of hair away from her face, lingering for a moment on her cheek. Zara's heart was pounding so loudly she was sure he could hear it. I came here to help the village," she stammered, trying to remind herself why she was here. But her words sounded weak, even to her own ears. "And you're helping," he said softly, his eyes darkening. "But you must also allow yourself to live, Zara. To feel. You've sacrificed so much for others. Don't you think it's time to take something for yourself?" Before she could respond, Adisa leaned in, his lips hovering just inches from hers. The air between them was electric, charged with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. Zara wanted to pull away, but her body seemed frozen in place, her senses overwhelmed by the closeness of him. And then, he kissed her. At first, it was soft, almost tentative, as if he were giving her a chance to stop him. But when she didn't move away, the kiss deepened, becoming more urgent. Zara's mind screamed at her to pull back, to stop this madness, but her body had other ideas. She found herself leaning into him, her hands clutching his robe as if it were the only thing keeping her grounded. For a moment, she allowed herself to get lost in the sensation, the warmth of his lips, the taste of the wine still lingering on his breath, the way his hands gently but firmly held her close. It was intoxicating, exhilarating, and terrifying all at once. But just as quickly as it began, reality came crashing back. Zara broke the kiss, pulling away abruptly, her chest heaving. I shouldn't be doing this, she whispered, her voice shaky. Adisa's eyes were dark with desire, but there was also a flicker of something else, triumph. Why not? He asked, his voice smooth as silk. You want this as much as I do. Why deny yourself the pleasure? Zara stood up, her legs unsteady beneath her. I need to go, she said, her voice firmer now. This was a mistake. Adisa didn't move to stop her. Instead, he simply watched her with that same knowing smile. Very well, doctor. But remember, my doors are always open to you. And there's always a place for you by my side. Zara fled the room, her heart racing, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. She couldn't believe what had just happened. How had she allowed herself to be drawn into his web so easily? She was supposed to be here to help the villagers, not to become entangled in an affair with their powerful, dangerous chief. As she stepped out into the cool night air, she tried to steady her breath. The village lay quiet before her, but she knew that beneath its calm surface, darkness lurked. And somehow, she had just become part of it. The days after Zara's encounter with Chief Adisa were a blur. She threw herself into her work at the clinic, trying to drown out the memories of that night. She told herself that it had been a moment of weakness, one that she couldn't afford to repeat. But no matter how hard she tried to focus on her patients, her thoughts kept drifting back to the warmth of his touch, the intensity of his gaze, and the way he made her feel desired, yet dangerously exposed. The villagers continued to arrive at the clinic with symptoms that baffled her. Many of them complained of fatigue, dizziness, and a persistent cough. Zara was determined to find the cause of the mysterious illness, but resources were scarce, and the villagers were reluctant to speak openly about their health. It was as if a shadow of fear hung over them, one that she couldn't quite decipher. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, Zara returned to the small room she had been staying in since her arrival. Exhausted, she collapsed onto her bed, her thoughts drifting back to Chief Adisa. Her fingers brushed against her lips, still remembering the feel of his kiss. She shook her head, trying to banish the memory. She couldn't afford to get distracted, not now, not when the village needed her. But as the days turned into weeks, Zara began to notice changes in her own body. She felt constantly fatigued, her appetite waning, and her emotions were on edge. At first, she chalked it up to the stress of her work and the tension she felt every time she thought of Adisa. But when she missed her second period, a cold dread settled in the pit of her stomach. Determined to put her mind at ease, Zara decided to confirm her suspicions. After hours of debating with herself, she gathered the necessary supplies from her clinic. She tried to stay calm, her hands trembling as she performed the test. When the results finally appeared, her heart sank. She was pregnant. Zara sat down heavily, the realization hitting her like a punch to the gut. Tears pricked at her eyes as a wave of panic washed over her. This couldn't be happening. Not now. Not like this. Her mind raced with 1,000 questions, but one thought overshadowed them all. What would she do now? The father of her child was the most powerful and dangerous man in the village. She had seen the lengths to which Chief Adisa would go to protect his interests. If he found out about the pregnancy, there was no telling what he would do. Zara couldn't afford to let him control her life, not after everything she had sacrificed to build her career. Wiping away her tears, she tried to steady her breath. She needed to think clearly. For now, the only thing she could do was keep this a secret. She couldn't trust anyone, not even Mama Ifioma, who had been like a mother to her. Zara knew that the chief had eyes and ears everywhere. If word got out, it wouldn't take long for it to reach Adisa. The next day, Zara went back to work at the clinic, forcing herself to act as if nothing had changed. But it wasn't long before she started to feel the consequences of her condition. The nausea hit her in waves, and the fatigue made it harder to focus on her patients. She couldn't let anyone suspect that something was wrong, so she pushed through the discomfort with a forced smile. However, it wasn't just her personal life that was unraveling. The mysterious illness in the village was worsening. More and more people were falling sick, and no one seemed to know why. Zara was beginning to suspect that something in the environment was causing it, but without proper equipment or support, she was running out of options. As she was treating a young mother and her child one afternoon, a shadow fell across the doorway. Zara looked up to see one of Chief Adisa's guards standing there, his expression unreadable. "The chief wishes to see you," the guard announced, his voice curt. Zara's heart skipped a beat. She had done her best to avoid Adisa since that night, but it seemed she could no longer escape him. Nodding, she finished up with her patient and reluctantly followed the guard to the chief's mansion. The sun was setting as Zara arrived at the mansion, the sky tinged with shades of orange and pink. The guard led her through the now familiar corridors until they reached Adisa's private study. The room was dimly lit, the scent of incense hanging heavy in the air. Adisa was seated behind a large wooden desk, a glass of dark liquid in his hand. "Zara," he said, his voice smooth and warm, "I was beginning to wonder if you were avoiding me." Zara forced a polite smile, keeping her hands clasped tightly in front of her to stop them from shaking. "I've been busy with my work at the clinic, Chief. The villagers need me." Adisa's eyes narrowed slightly as he studied her. "Indeed. But I've heard troubling rumors that you've been overworking yourself. You look unwell." Zara stiffened. Was he already suspicious? She couldn't afford to let him find out about the pregnancy. "It's just fatigue," she said quickly. "There's so much to be done, and I'm trying to help as best I can." Adisa stood and walked around the desk, stopping just inches from her. He reached out, gently brushing his fingers along her cheek. "You know, Zara, you don't have to bear this burden alone. You could have everything you desire if you chose to stand by my side." Her stomach twisted at his words. The seductive undertone was clear, but there was also an implicit threat. Zara forced herself to step back, bowing her head to hide the turmoil in her eyes. "Thank you, Chief, but my place is with the villagers." Adisa's smile faded, replaced by a cold, calculating look. "Very well," he said quietly. "But remember, Zara, I always get what I want. You would do well not to forget that." Zara nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. As she turned to leave, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being pulled deeper into a web from which there would be no escape. As she stepped out into the cool night air, she placed a protective hand over her abdomen, a fierce determination rising within her. She had to find a way to protect herself and her unborn child. But with Chief Adisa's eyes everywhere, it was only a matter of time before her secret was exposed. The early morning sun cast a warm glow over the village of Amaju, but to Zara, the brightness seemed to mock the darkness that was steadily enveloping her life. As she made her way to the clinic, her mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. The discovery of her pregnancy still weighed heavily on her, but she had no time to dwell on it now. The village needed her more than ever, and she was determined to focus on her work. The clinic was already crowded when she arrived, villagers spilling out into the street as they waited for treatment. The mysterious illness had spread rapidly in recent weeks, and the cases showed no signs of slowing down. Zara wiped the sweat from her brow and pushed her worries aside as she began attending to the patients. "Dr. Zara, please help," a woman cried as she held her feverish child in her arms. The boy's eyes were sunken, his skin pale and clammy. Zara's heart clenched at the sight. The symptoms were becoming all too familiar: fatigue, severe cough, and dehydration. "Has he been drinking water from the village well?" Zara asked, her mind racing through possible causes. The woman nodded, tears streaming down her face. Zara made a mental note. This was the 5th case today linked to the village well. As the day wore on, Zara couldn't shake the feeling that something more sinister was at play. The symptoms didn't align with any common illnesses she knew of, and the rapid spread was alarming. She needed to investigate further, but without proper resources, she was grasping at straws. During a brief moment of reprieve, Zara retreated to the small back room of the clinic to review her notes. She was exhausted, but her mind wouldn't rest. She was certain the illness was connected to the water supply, but she needed proof. A sudden knock on the door made her jump. She opened it to find Mama Ifeoma standing there, her face lined with worry. "Zara, you must be careful," Mama Ifeoma whispered urgently. "There are rumors spreading through the village. People are saying you're asking too many questions." Zara's stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" "I'm just trying to help the villagers." Mama Ifeoma glanced over her shoulder before stepping closer. "Chief Adisa doesn't like it when people interfere with his plans. Be careful, my child. The chief's reach is long, and his patience is short." Zara nodded, but she couldn't allow herself to be swayed by fear. "Thank you for the warning, Mama. But if I don't find out what's causing this illness, more people will die." Mama Ifeoma hesitated, then leaned in closer. "There are whispers that the chief controls the water supply. Some say he's using it to punish those who don't pledge their loyalty to him." Zara's eyes widened. The pieces were beginning to fall into place. Could Chief Adisa really be poisoning the water to tighten his grip on the villagers? If so, how could she prove it? That evening, after the last of her patients had left, Zara made her way to the village well. The sun had set, and the village was cloaked in shadows. She had waited until nightfall to avoid drawing attention. With a small lantern in hand, she crouched beside the well, her heart pounding in her chest. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth as she carefully lowered a glass vial into the water. If she was right, this sample would confirm her suspicions. Just as she was about to pull it up, she heard the crunch of footsteps behind her. "Working late, Dr. Zara?" Zara's heart skipped a beat as she turned to see Chief Adisa's guard, the same one who had summoned her to the chief's mansion before. His expression was unreadable, but there was a hint of menace in his eyes. "I'm just collecting some samples," Zara said, trying to keep her voice steady. The guard's lips curled into a faint smile. "The chief has already ensured that the water is safe. There's no need for your interference." Zara forced a smile, hoping it would mask her fear. "I'm just being thorough. I wouldn't want to overlook anything that could help the villagers." The guard took a step closer, his shadow looming over her. "The chief appreciates your dedication, but it would be wise to remember your place. Some things are best left alone." Zara swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around the vial. "Of course. I understand." The guard lingered for a moment, his eyes boring into hers, before finally turning and walking away. Zara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She knew she had to move quickly. If Chief Adisa's men were already suspicious, it was only a matter of time before they tried to stop her. Back at the clinic, Zara locked the door behind her and set to work analyzing the water sample. She had limited equipment, but she was determined to find the truth. As she peered into the microscope, her worst fears were confirmed. The water was contaminated with a strange, oily substance that she couldn't identify. She sank into her chair, her mind spinning. If Chief Adisa was behind this, he was deliberately poisoning the villagers to control them. But why? And how could she prove it without the proper resources? A sudden wave of nausea hit her, reminding her of her own precarious situation. She placed a protective hand over her abdomen, fear gripping her heart. She wasn't just fighting for the villagers now, she was fighting for her own survival and that of her unborn child. She knew she had to confront Chief Adisa, but the thought of facing him again made her skin crawl. How could she stand up to a man who had the power to crush her with a single word? A knock on the clinic door interrupted her thoughts. Zara's heart leapt into her throat as she opened it to find Tabo, her estranged uncle, standing in the doorway. "Uncle Tabo? What are you doing here?" she whispered, her voice thick with confusion and relief. Tabo glanced around nervously before stepping inside. "We need to talk, Zara. There are things you don't know, things about the chief and your father. I came to warn you. You're in more danger than you realize." The air in the clinic was thick with tension as Zara locked the door behind her and turned to face her uncle Tabo. She hadn't seen him in years, not since he'd left the village under mysterious circumstances. His presence here was both a shock and a relief, but it also sent a chill down her spine. What could have driven him to come out of hiding now? Tabo's face was lined with worry, his eyes darting around the small room as if expecting someone to burst through the door at any moment. "Zara, we don't have much time," he said in a low, urgent voice. "If Chief Adisa finds out I'm here, it will be the end for both of us." Zara motioned for him to sit down. "Uncle Tabo, you need to tell me everything. The village is falling apart, and I think the chief is behind it. But I need proof." Tabo hesitated, running a hand through his graying hair. "Your father tried to expose him too, you know. That's why he was killed." Zara's breath caught in her throat. "What are you talking about?" "I thought my father died of a heart attack." Tabo shook his head, his expression grim. "That's what they wanted you to believe. Your father discovered that Adisa was using the villagers as pawns in his schemes. He tried to warn people, but Adisa had him silenced." A cold dread settled in Zara's stomach as Tabo's words sank in. She had always suspected there was more to her father's death, but to hear it confirmed like this was almost too much to bear. "What schemes? What exactly is the chief doing?" Tabo leaned forward, lowering his voice even further. "Adisa has been using the village as a front for illegal mining operations. The water contamination you discovered is no accident. The chemicals from the mines are poisoning the water supply, but Adisa doesn't care as long as he's making a profit." Zara's hands clenched into fists. "That monster! How can he do this to his own people?" Tabo's eyes were dark with anger. "Power and greed, my dear. That's all that matters to him. Anyone who stands in his way ends up like your father, or worse." Zara's mind was spinning. This explained so much: the mysterious illness, the chief's tight control over the villagers, the threats against her. But how could she possibly stand up to a man like Adisa, who seemed to hold all the cards? "There's more," Tabo said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Adisa is planning something big. The annual festival is coming up, and he's going to use it as a cover to expand his operations. If he succeeds, the entire village will be at his mercy." Zara's heart pounded. She had to stop this, but she was just one person against a powerful man with an army of loyal guards. "Why are you telling me this now, uncle? Why didn't you come forward sooner?" Tabo looked away, shame written across his face. "I was afraid. After your father's death, I went into hiding. But I couldn't live with myself any longer, knowing what he's doing to our people. And now, with you back, I thought maybe we could finish what your father started." Zara felt a surge of determination. She couldn't let her father's death be in vain, and she couldn't let Adisa destroy the village. But the risks were enormous. If she made a wrong move, it wouldn't just be her life on the line, it would be her unborn child's as well. After Tabo left, Zara knew she couldn't waste any time. If what her uncle said was true, she needed solid evidence to expose Adisa's corruption. The festival was only days away, and if Adisa's plan succeeded, it would be too late to stop him. Determined to get the proof she needed, Zara decided to return to Adisa's mansion. She knew it was a risk, especially after their last encounter, but it was the only way to find the documents that could link him to the illegal mining operations. Under the cover of darkness, Zara made her way to the mansion. The guards were fewer in number tonight, likely preparing for the upcoming festival. Taking advantage of the lowered security, she slipped through the side entrance and made her way toward Adisa's private office. Her heart raced as she crept down the dimly lit corridors, each shadow seeming to reach out and grab her. She knew she had to move quickly. If she was caught, there would be no mercy this time. Reaching the office door, she held her breath as she tried the handle. It was locked, but after a few moments of fumbling with a small hairpin, she managed to pry it open. Slipping inside, she closed the door behind her and began searching through the stacks of papers on the desk. The room was filled with documents, most of them seemingly innocuous business contracts. But as she dug deeper, she found what she was looking for: detailed plans of the mining operations, maps of the village's underground resources, and records of payments to local officials to keep them quiet. Zara's hands trembled as she gathered the documents into a bundle. This was it, the proof she needed to expose Adisa. But as she turned to leave, she heard the faint creak of a floorboard outside the door. Panic surged through her. There was no time to hide. She pressed herself against the wall, praying whoever it was would pass by. The footsteps grew louder, stopping just outside the door. "Who's in there?" a voice demanded. It was the same guard who had confronted her at the well. Zara's heart pounded in her chest as she heard the door handle rattle. She had seconds to act. Thinking quickly, she doused the lantern and slipped behind a heavy curtain just as the door burst open. The guard stepped into the dark room, his eyes scanning the shadows. Zara held her breath, willing herself to remain perfectly still. After a tense moment, the guard grunted in frustration and left, slamming the door behind him. Zara waited until she was sure he was gone before slipping out of her hiding place. Clutching the stolen documents to her chest, she made her way back through the mansion and into the safety of the night. Breathless and sweating, Zara finally returned to the clinic. She spread the documents out on the table, her eyes scanning the incriminating evidence. She had everything she needed to expose Chief Adisa's crimes. But as she stared at the papers, a new fear gripped her heart. Chief Adisa was not going to let her go quietly. He had already killed her father to protect his secrets. What would he do when he found out that she had uncovered the truth? As she stared at the damning evidence, Zara realized that she was now in deeper than ever. The clock was ticking, and the festival was only days away. If she didn't act fast, she would lose her one chance to save the village and protect her unborn child. The air in Amaji village was thick with anticipation. The annual festival was just days away, and preparations were in full swing. Drums echoed through the night as villagers practiced their dances and songs. But for Zara, there was no time for celebration. She was running out of time. Back in the clinic, Zara pored over the stolen documents spread across her desk. The evidence was damning, clear proof that Chief Adisa had been poisoning the village's water supply to expand his illegal mining operations. The contamination was not an accident. It was a deliberate act to weaken those who refused to pledge their loyalty to him. She had the evidence, but now she needed a plan. How could she expose Adisa without getting herself killed? She couldn't do it alone. She needed allies, and she knew exactly where to start. Her old friend Nomusa, who had been one of the few villagers she could trust. Under the cover of darkness, Zara made her way to Nomusa's small home on the outskirts of the village. The moon was hidden behind a thick layer of clouds, making the path difficult to navigate. She kept her hood up, her heart racing with every shadow that flickered in the corner of her vision. When she arrived, she knocked softly on the door. After a few tense moments, Nomusa opened it, her face breaking into a smile. "Zara, it's good to see you," she whispered, pulling her inside. "I need your help, Nomusa," Zara said, getting straight to the point. "I have proof that Chief Adisa is behind the illness. He's poisoning the water to control the village." Nomusa's eyes widened, but there was a flicker of something else, something Zara couldn't quite place. That's serious, Zara. If what you're saying is true, the chief won't stop until he silences you." "I know," Zara replied, her voice barely more than a whisper. "But I can't do this alone. We have to expose him before the festival, before he tightens his grip on the village even further." Nomusa looked down, her fingers twisting nervously. "You're asking me to betray the chief. If we're caught." Zara reached out, squeezing Nomusa's hand. "Please, Nomusa. You know this is wrong. The people are suffering. I need someone I can trust." There was a long pause, and then Nomusa nodded slowly. "All right, I'll help you. But we have to be careful." Relief flooded through Zara, and for the first time in days, she allowed herself to hope. "Thank you, Nomusa. I knew I could count on you." The following night, Zara and Nomusa met again in a secluded area behind the clinic. Zara had brought the documents she had stolen, carefully wrapped in cloth to protect them from prying eyes. "We need to get these to the village council," Zara said, handing the bundle to Nomusa. "If they see this, they'll have no choice but to act." Nomusa nodded, but her hands trembled as she took the papers. "I'll make sure they see it," she promised. "You should go back to the clinic and wait for my signal." Zara watched as Nomusa hurried away into the darkness, her heart swelling with gratitude. For the first time, It felt like things were finally going her way. She turned to head back to the clinic, her mind racing with plans for what would come next. But as she neared the clinic, something didn't feel right. The air was too still, the night too quiet. Zara's instincts screamed at her to turn back, but it was too late. A pair of strong hands grabbed her from behind, forcing a rag over her mouth. She struggled, her vision blurring as a sickly sweet scent filled her nostrils. When she came to, Zara found herself bound to a chair in a dimly lit room. Her head throbbed, and it took a moment for her to remember what had happened. Panic surged through her as she realized she was no longer in her clinic. You're awake." Zara's heart sank at the sound of that familiar voice. Chief Adisa stepped out of the shadows, his smile colder than she had ever seen it. "I must say, Doctor, I'm disappointed. You should have known better than to try and cross me." Zara's throat was dry, but she forced herself to speak. "What do you want, Adisa?" "What I want," he said, circling her like a predator, "is for you to stop meddling in affairs that don't concern you." Zara glared at him. "The villagers are dying because of you. I won't let you get away with it." Adisa laughed softly, shaking his head. "You think you're so clever, don't you? But you made a crucial mistake. You trusted the wrong person." The door behind him creaked open, and Zara's breath caught in her throat as No Musa walked in, holding the bundle of documents. Her eyes were downcast, but there was no mistaking the guilt in her expression. "No Musa," Zara whispered, disbelief and betrayal flooding her senses. "How could you?" "I'm sorry, Zara," No Musa said, her voice trembling. "But I had no choice. The chief, he has my family. I couldn't risk their lives." Adisa clapped his hands slowly, a mocking smile on his lips. "You see, Doctor? Loyalty is such a fragile thing. And you, my dear, are all alone." Zara's heart sank as the full weight of the betrayal hit her. The one person she thought she could trust had turned her over to the man she was trying to expose. Now, she was at Adisa's mercy, and there was no one left to help her. Left alone in the dimly lit room, Zara struggled against the ropes binding her wrists. Her mind raced. She couldn't give up now, not when so much was at stake. She had to think of a way out. The festival was only days away, and if Adisa succeeded in his plans, it would be too late to save the village. But as she struggled against her restraints, she heard the faint sound of footsteps approaching. The door creaked open, and a figure stepped inside, casting a long shadow across the room. "Zara, we don't have much time," whispered the familiar voice of her uncle Tabo. "I'm getting you out of here." The rope bindings around Zara's wrists had rubbed her skin raw, but she barely noticed the pain. The betrayal from No Musa still stung, cutting deeper than any physical wound. Alone in the dimly lit room, Zara's thoughts raced. How could she have been so blind? She had trusted No Musa with her life, and it had nearly cost her everything. Her only solace was that Tabo had found her in time. Her uncle had managed to free her from Chief Adisa's clutches, but the escape had been fraught with danger. Now, as she hid in a cramped storeroom in Tabo's old house on the outskirts of the village, she knew her time was running out. "You need to leave, Zara," Tabo whispered urgently, his eyes darting toward the door. "Adisa's men are everywhere. If they find you, they won't let you live a second time." Zara clutched her abdomen protectively, a newfound fierceness in her eyes. "I'm not leaving, Uncle. Not yet. I can't run away knowing what Adisa is planning for the village." Tabo sighed, his expression pained. "You're too much like your father. He wouldn't back down either, and look where that got him." Zara's eyes flashed with determination. "I have to finish what he started. For the villagers. For my baby." Tabo's eyes softened as he looked at her. "You don't have to do this alone. But if you're going to stay, we need a plan." As Zara and Tabo discussed their next steps, Tabo revealed more of what he had uncovered. The annual festival was not just a celebration, it was the cover for something much darker. Chief Adisa planned to use the gathering to announce the expansion of his illegal mining operations, using the villagers' land and resources without their consent. Worse still, Tabo had discovered that the festival's grand ritual was not just for show. "Adisa believes that your child, Zara, will grant him even more power, Tabo whispered, his voice barely audible. He thinks your bloodline is special, that your baby will be the key to securing his control over the village. Zara's heart skipped a beat. What are you saying? Tabo's expression was grim. Adisa plans to use the child in a ritual during the festival. He believes it will bind the villagers' loyalty to him forever. A cold dread settled in Zara's stomach as she absorbed Tabo's words. Her mind raced. Chief Adisa was not only willing to sacrifice the villagers for his greed, he was willing to use her unborn child as a pawn in his twisted quest for power. We have to stop him, Zara said, her voice steely with resolve. But how? The festival is in 2 days, and Adisa's men are watching my every move. Tabo nodded. There's only one way. We need to expose him publicly. If the villagers see the proof of his corruption, they might turn against him. But it won't be easy. Adisa controls the council, and most of the villagers are too afraid to defy him. Zara's mind whirled. She had the documents she had stolen from the mansion, but she needed a way to present them to the villagers without getting caught. If we can reveal the truth during the festival, when everyone is gathered, we might have a chance. Tabo nodded slowly. It's a dangerous plan, but it could work. The element of surprise will be our only advantage. Later that night, as Zara tried to rest, a deep fear gnawed at her. She was exhausted, her body aching from the stress and physical strain, but sleep eluded her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Adisa's cold smile and heard Nomusa's trembling apology. And now, the weight of the knowledge that Adisa intended to use her child in his twisted ritual was almost too much to bear. She placed a protective hand over her belly, whispering a silent promise to the life growing inside her. I will protect you, no matter what it takes. A sudden noise outside the storeroom jolted her awake. Tabo rushed in, his face pale with fear. We need to move, now. They've found us. Zara's heart leapt into her throat as she grabbed the bundle of documents and followed Tabo out into the night. The sound of shouts and the clatter of boots echoed through the narrow alleys as they ran. Every shadow seemed to reach out to grab them, every corner a potential trap. We can't outrun them, Zara gasped, clutching her side as they darted through the darkened village. We need to hide. Tabo nodded and led her toward the dense forest on the outskirts of Amaju. They slipped through the trees, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter behind them. After what felt like hours, they finally stopped to catch their breath. Zara leaned against a tree, her lungs burning. Uncle, what do we do now? Tabo's eyes were fierce with determination. We expose him at the festival. It's the only way. But you need to be careful, Zara. If Adisa finds out you're planning to reveal his secrets, he won't hesitate to kill you and your child. As dawn broke over the village, Zara and Tabo made their way to a hidden safe house where a few loyal villagers awaited them. These were the few who had dared to resist Adisa's rule, but their numbers were small and their resources even smaller. We don't have much time, Zara said, spreading the documents on a makeshift table. We need to get these into the hands of the village council before the festival begins. But how? One of the villagers asked, fear evident in his eyes. Adisa's men are everywhere. They'll kill anyone who tries to defy him. Zara took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. I will present the evidence myself. During the ritual, when everyone is gathered, it's our best chance to expose him in front of the entire village. The villagers exchanged worried glances, but Tabo stepped forward, placing a hand on Zara's shoulder. You're brave, my niece. But remember, you're not alone. We'll be with you. Zara nodded, grateful for the support, but she knew that the risk was hers to bear. She had already lost too much, her father, her friends, her peace. But she couldn't allow Adisa to take her child as well. As the group finalized their plans, the weight of what lay ahead pressed down on Zara's shoulders. The festival was only a day away, and with it, the final showdown between her and Chief Adisa. There was no turning back now. The village of Amaju was buzzing with excitement. Brightly colored banners fluttered in the breeze, and the rhythmic pounding of drums filled the air. The annual festival was finally here, and the villagers were pouring into the square, eager to join the celebration. But behind the smiles and laughter, a current of fear and tension ran through those who knew the truth. Zara stood at the edge of the village square, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it, the moment she had been preparing for. In her hands, she clutched the documents she and Tabo had risked their lives to obtain. The festival provided the perfect opportunity to reveal the truth to the villagers, to show them what kind of man Chief Adisa truly was. The plan was simple. She would speak to the village council members during the opening ceremony and present the evidence against Adisa. Tabo and a handful of loyal villagers would act as her backup, ready to protect her if things went wrong. But as the time drew near, doubt gnawed at Zara's resolve. Could she really pull this off? Was it enough to turn the people against Adisa, or would they simply turn a blind eye out of fear? Are you ready? Tabo whispered, appearing at her side. His eyes were dark with worry, but there was also a glimmer of hope in them. Zara nodded, though her hands were trembling. I have to be. We don't have another chance. Tabo placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Stay strong, Zara. The villagers deserve to know the truth. We're right behind you. As the village elder began the ceremony with a speech, Zara's eyes scanned the crowd for familiar faces. Her heart sank when she saw Nomusa standing near the front, her eyes averted. Zara hadn't spoken to her former friend since the night she was captured. Even now, she could still feel the sting of betrayal. But there was no time to dwell on it. She had a mission to complete. The elder finished his speech, and the crowd erupted into cheers. Zara took a deep breath and stepped forward. Please, I need to address the village, she called out, her voice surprisingly steady despite the fear clawing at her insides. The crowd fell silent as all eyes turned toward her. Zara's pulse quickened, but she forced herself to stand tall. My fellow villagers, I have uncovered something terrible that you all need to know. Zara held up the bundle of documents for all to see. Chief Adisa has been using our village as a front for his illegal mining operations. He has been poisoning our water supply to weaken those who refuse to pledge their loyalty to him. Murmurs of disbelief rippled through the crowd. Chief Adisa, standing off to the side, crossed his arms over his chest, his expression unreadable. But Zara could see the rage simmering in his eyes. She pushed forward, her voice rising. These documents prove everything. Your illnesses, your suffering, it's all because of him. A few villagers began to whisper among themselves, their faces filled with confusion and fear. But just as Zara was about to continue, a loud voice cut through the air. Lies. Nomusa stepped forward, her voice carrying across the square. This woman is trying to deceive you all. She's the one who's been poisoning the water. She's trying to destroy our village. Zara's heart stopped. What are you talking about, Nomusa? She shouted, her voice breaking. You know that's not true. Nomusa's eyes were filled with tears, but her expression was cold and determined. Chief Adisa saved my family when we were starving. He has always protected us. You're nothing but an outsider trying to tear us apart. The crowd began to shift, uncertainty giving way to anger. Zara could feel the tide turning against her. She turned desperately to Tabo, but he was already being pushed back by Adisa's guards. Panic surged through her as the villagers closed in, their faces twisted with suspicion and fear. Wait. Listen to me. Zara pleaded, but her voice was drowned out by the jeers of the crowd. Someone threw a rock, narrowly missing her head. You have to believe me. I have the proof. Chief Adisa stepped forward, his expression calm and composed. Enough, he said, his voice like a whip cracking through the air. The crowd fell silent. Dr. Zara has clearly lost her mind. It's tragic, really. She came here to help us, and now look at her desperate and delusional. Zara's vision blurred with tears as Adisa's guards seized her arms, pinning them behind her back. No, you can't do this, she screamed, struggling against their iron grip. But it was no use. The villagers had already turned away, their faith in their chief too strong to be shaken by her words. You have caused enough chaos in my village, Adisa said, his voice dripping with false concern. Take her to the holding cells. We'll deal with her later. As the guards dragged Zara away, she caught one last glimpse of Nomusa, who stood with her head bowed. The betrayal cut deep, but there was no time to dwell on it. Zara knew she was running out of chances. If she didn't find a way to escape, both she and her unborn child would be at Adisa's mercy. The damp, cold air of the underground cell chilled Zara to the bone. The walls were rough stone, and the only light came from a flickering lantern outside the iron bars. Her wrists ached from the tight restraints, and her body was exhausted from the struggle. She sank to her knees, her heart heavy with despair. How had it all gone so wrong? She had been so close to exposing Adisa, and now she was locked away like a criminal. Worse still, she was no closer to stopping him from using her child in his twisted ritual. A clanging sound echoed through the cell, and Zara looked up to see a familiar figure standing at the door. It was Tabo, his face bruised but determined. "We don't have much time," he whispered, fumbling with a set of keys. "I managed to slip away from the guards, but they'll notice I'm missing soon." "Tabo, I failed," Zara whispered, tears streaming down her face. "No, you didn't," Tabo said firmly as he unlocked the door. "There's still a way to stop Adisa, but you have to trust me." Zara nodded, forcing herself to stand. "What do we do?" "There's a hidden passage that leads out of the village," Tabo explained. "We need to gather what's left of the villagers who are still loyal to us." "It's not over yet, Zara. We can still stop him." With renewed determination, Zara followed Tabo into the dark passageway. The festival was still raging above them, but Zara knew that if they were going to stop Adisa, it had to be now. The final confrontation was coming, and this time, she couldn't afford to fail. The air in the hidden passageway was damp and cold as Zara and Tabo made their way through the darkness. The flickering light of their lantern barely illuminated the narrow, winding tunnel, but it was enough to keep them moving forward. Every sound seemed amplified in the silence, and Zara's nerves were on edge. She couldn't shake the feeling that at any moment, Chief Adisa's guards would burst through the shadows to capture them. "We don't have much time," Tabo whispered, glancing over his shoulder. "If Adisa realizes you've escaped, he'll tighten his grip on the villagers. We need to act quickly." Zara nodded, her heart heavy with a mixture of fear and determination. "What's the plan, Uncle? How are we going to stop him?" Tabo paused, turning to face her with a serious expression. "There's one more thing you need to know before we confront Adisa. It's about your mother." Zara's stomach twisted. "What are you talking about?" "My mother. She died of an illness, didn't she?" Tabo shook his head slowly. "No, Zara. That's what they wanted you to believe. Your mother was murdered because she tried to stop Adisa from performing a ritual similar to the one he's planning now." Zara's breath hitched as the weight of Tabo's words sank in. "What ritual? Why would he kill her for that?" Tabo's eyes were dark with sorrow. "Your mother discovered that Adisa was using dark, ancient practices to secure his power. She learned that he believed he could gain control over the villagers' minds through a sacrificial ritual involving a child of special lineage. When she tried to expose him, Adisa silenced her." A cold dread settled over Zara. "He plans to use my child for the ritual, doesn't he?" Tabo nodded grimly. "Yes, he believes your child's bloodline will bind the villagers to him forever. If we don't stop him, he'll use the ritual during the festival to cement his control." Zara's heart pounded in her chest as fear and anger surged through her. Her mother had been killed trying to protect the village, and now Adisa was planning to use her unborn child in the same twisted ritual. She couldn't let it happen. "We have to find a way to stop the ritual," Zara said, her voice shaking with urgency. "How do we even begin to fight someone as powerful as Adisa?" Tabo took a deep breath, his expression resolute. "There's an ancient diary hidden in the ritual chamber. It belonged to your mother. It details the rituals and how to counteract them. If we can get our hands on it, we might have a chance." The sounds of the festival echoed above them as they emerged from the tunnel into the dense forest behind Adisa's mansion. The ritual grounds were hidden deep within the woods, a place known only to the village elders and Adisa's inner circle. Zara's heart raced as they made their way through the shadows, the sounds of chanting growing louder with every step. "Stay low and keep quiet," Tabo whispered as they approached the clearing. Zara's eyes widened as she took in the sight before her. The ritual site was an ancient circle of stones, lit by torches that cast eerie shadows on the twisted trees surrounding it. Villagers, cloaked in ceremonial robes, stood in a circle, their faces hidden by masks. At the center of the circle was Chief Adisa, dressed in an elaborate robe adorned with symbols that Zara couldn't decipher. His voice boomed through the clearing as he led the villagers in a chant, his eyes glowing with an unnatural fervor. Zara's breath caught in her throat when she saw what lay in the center of the circle, a stone altar covered in strange symbols. She knew, without a doubt, that this was where Adisa planned to carry out the ritual. Her hands tightened around the bundle of documents she had managed to hold onto, her only hope of exposing Adisa. "We need to find that diary," Tabo whispered urgently, pulling her back into the shadows. "It's the only way to stop him." Slipping past the guards stationed around the perimeter, Zara and Tabo made their way to the small stone chamber where the ritual artifacts were kept. The air was thick with the smell of incense and something metallic that turned Zara's stomach. As they entered the chamber, Zara's eyes were immediately drawn to a dusty, leather-bound book on a pedestal. "That must be it," Zara whispered, rushing forward to grab the diary. The moment her fingers touched the worn leather, a strange warmth spread through her. She opened the book and began flipping through the pages, her eyes widening as she read the ancient texts her mother had carefully transcribed. The diary was filled with detailed notes on the ritual Adisa was planning, as well as instructions on how to break the spell he intended to cast. Zara's heart raced as she realized that her mother had found a way to counteract the ritual, but she had been killed before she could stop Adisa. "This is it," Zara whispered, her voice filled with hope. "We can stop him." Tabo nodded, his eyes shining with determination. "We need to act fast. Once the ritual begins, it will be too late." As they made their way back to the clearing, the chanting had grown louder, the villagers swaying in unison as Adisa raised his hands to the sky. The air crackled with a strange energy that made the hairs on Zara's arms stand on end. "We have to get close enough to disrupt the ritual," Tabo urged. "If you can recite the counterspell from the diary, it might be enough to break his hold on the villagers." Zara nodded, clutching the diary to her chest. "I'm ready." But just as they were about to step into the clearing, a hand clamped down on Zara's shoulder, pulling her back into the shadows. She gasped, ready to fight, but froze when she saw the face of her old friend Nomusa. "Nomusa?" Zara whispered, her heart pounding with confusion. "What are you doing here?" Nomusa's eyes were filled with desperation. "I made a terrible mistake, Zara. I thought I was protecting my family, but I was wrong. Adisa plans to kill everyone who opposes him. You have to stop him." Zara hesitated, her mind reeling. Could she really trust Nomusa after what had happened? But as she looked into her friend's tear-filled eyes, she saw a flicker of the old Nomusa, the one she had trusted with her life. "Fine," Zara said, her voice cold. "Help us stop him then." Nomusa nodded and gestured toward the clearing. "I'll distract the guards. You need to get to the altar before Adisa finishes the chant." As Nomusa slipped into the shadows, Zara and Tabo moved toward the center of the clearing, their hearts pounding in unison. The moment they stepped into the torchlight, Adisa's eyes locked onto Zara's, a cruel smile spreading across his lips. Well, doctor," he sneered. "I was wondering when you would show up." But Zara was no longer afraid. Clutching the diary, she stepped forward, her voice ringing out over the chanting. "I know what you're planning, Adisa. And I'm going to stop you." The crowd fell silent as Zara began to recite the counterspell, her voice strong and unwavering. The villagers watched in shock as the air around the altar seemed to shimmer, the dark energy beginning to dissipate. Adisa's eyes widened with fury, and he lunged toward her, but Tabo and Nomusa stepped in to block him. The ritual was unraveling, but the battle was far from over. The moon hung heavy in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the ancient stone circle deep within the forest. The rhythmic pounding of drums echoed through the trees, growing louder with each passing moment. Zara's heart raced as she and Tabo approached the clearing. The sounds of the festival in the village square seemed distant now, swallowed by the dark forest as they neared the ritual site where Chief Adisa planned to carry out his twisted ceremony. "Stay close," Tabo whispered, his eyes darting around the shadows. "We'll only have one chance at this." Zara nodded, clutching her mother's diary tightly against her chest. She had memorized the counterspell, but her hands were still shaking. The knowledge that her unborn child was the target of Adisa's ritual filled her with a fear so profound it nearly paralyzed her. But she couldn't afford to hesitate. Not now. Not when so much was at stake. As they crept closer, they saw the villagers gathered in a tight circle around the altar. Torches flickered, casting ominous shadows on the trees. At the center stood Chief Adisa, his arms raised high, his voice booming as he chanted in a language Zara could barely understand. The air around him seemed to shimmer with a strange, unnatural energy. Zara's heart sank as she saw the stone altar adorned with ceremonial robes and strange symbols painted in blood. This was no ordinary ritual. Adisa was preparing to perform a sacrifice. She could see it in his eyes, which glinted with madness and a lust for power. "Zara, we have to move now," Tabo urged, gripping her arm. "Once he begins the final incantation, it'll be too late." Zara took a deep breath, steadying herself. She knew what she had to do. She had to disrupt the ritual before Adisa could complete it and bind the villagers to him forever. Clutching her mother's diary, she stepped into the clearing, her voice ringing out over the sound of the drums. "Stop this madness, Adisa," she shouted, her voice carrying through the night air. "The villagers deserve to know the truth." The chanting faltered, and all eyes turned toward Zara. For a moment, there was stunned silence, then angry murmurs rippled through the crowd. Chief Adisa's eyes narrowed as he locked his gaze on Zara, his expression one of cold fury. "You dare to interrupt the sacred ritual?" he hissed, his voice dripping with venom. "You've already tried to turn my people against me with your lies. But it's too late now." Zara stood her ground, raising the diary high. "This book belonged to my mother, the same woman you murdered to protect your secrets. It contains the truth about your so-called rituals. You've been using dark magic to control these people, poisoning their minds and bodies." The villagers exchanged confused and fearful glances, their loyalty to the chief wavering. For years, they had lived under his iron rule, believing that his rituals were necessary to protect them. But now, doubt began to creep into their hearts. "You think you can break my hold over them with a few words?" Adisa snarled, stepping toward Zara. "I have kept this village safe for decades. You, an outsider, know nothing of our ways." But Zara was not alone. As Adisa advanced, Tabo and a handful of brave villagers stepped forward, forming a protective circle around her. "Your time is over, Adisa," Tabo said, his voice steady. "The villagers deserve to know the truth." Adisa's eyes blazed with fury. "Then let them see," he roared, grabbing a ceremonial dagger from the altar. "If they will not submit willingly, I will take what I need by force." Without warning, Adisa lunged at Zara, the dagger gleaming in the torchlight. Zara's heart skipped a beat as she narrowly dodged the strike, the blade slicing through the air inches from her side. Tabo rushed forward, trying to wrestle the dagger from Adisa's grasp, but the chief was stronger than he looked, driven by a desperate rage. "Zara, recite the spell," Tabo shouted as he struggled with Adisa. "Now!" With shaking hands, Zara opened the diary to the marked page and began chanting the counter-spell her mother had written. Her voice was shaky at first, but as she continued, it grew louder, more confident. The air around them seemed to vibrate, the torches flickering as if caught in a gust of wind. Adisa's eyes widened as he realized what she was doing. "No! You cannot stop me," he bellowed, his voice laced with panic. He shoved Tabo aside and charged at Zara, but before he could reach her, Nomusa stepped in his path, her eyes filled with determination. "You won't touch her," Nomusa shouted, blocking his way. "I may have betrayed her once, but I will not let you harm her child." Adisa's face twisted with fury, but the counterspell was already taking effect. The ground beneath them trembled, and a powerful force seemed to pull at the very air, breaking the dark energy Adisa had conjured. The villagers watched in awe as the ritual circle began to unravel, the symbols on the ground fading into nothingness. "No! This cannot be!" Adisa screamed, but his voice was drowned out by the roar of the wind. Zara's chant reached a crescendo, and with a final, defiant shout, she completed the spell. A blinding flash of light erupted from the altar, and the force of it sent Adisa sprawling to the ground. The torches around the clearing flickered and died, plunging the forest into darkness. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. As the dust settled, the villagers slowly began to stir, their eyes no longer clouded with fear. Zara stood panting, her knees threatening to buckle from exhaustion. Tabo rushed to her side, helping her stay upright. "You did it, Zara," he whispered, his voice choked with relief. "You broke his spell." The villagers, finally free from Adisa's influence, looked around in confusion. Some began to cry as they realized the extent of the chief's deception. Others turned to Adisa, who was now cowering on the ground, stripped of his power. Nomusa, tears streaming down her face, knelt beside Zara. "I'm so sorry, Zara," she sobbed. "I was a fool to ever trust him. Can you ever forgive me?" Zara placed a trembling hand on Nomusa's shoulder. "It's not too late to make things right," she said softly. "Help us rebuild what Adisa destroyed." The villagers, emboldened by Zara's courage, began to drag Adisa toward the village square. "Let the council decide his fate," one of the elders said, his voice filled with righteous anger. "He will pay for his crimes." As they marched back toward the village, the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon. For the first time in years, there was a sense of hope in the air. Zara's heart swelled with relief as she realized that she had not only saved her unborn child, but had also freed the village from Adisa's tyranny. The villagers gathered in the square, their faces no longer filled with fear but with determination. Zara stood before them, her arms still bandaged, but her spirit unbroken. "This is not the end," she said, her voice carrying over the crowd. "This is the beginning of a new chapter for Amaju. Together, we will rebuild, heal, and protect what is ours." The crowd erupted into cheers, their voices filled with hope and joy. As Tabo and Nomusa stood by her side, Zara knew that while the battle had been hard, it was only the start of a new journey. A journey where she could finally live free from fear, knowing that her child would be born into a village united, no longer bound by the chains of Adisa's oppression. The morning sun rose over Amaju village, bathing the land in a golden light that felt warm and comforting. For the first time in years, the village was filled with a sense of relief and hope. The weight of fear that had hung over everyone like a dark cloud was finally lifted. The villagers moved about with renewed energy, preparing for a new chapter in their lives. Zara stood in the center of the village square, watching as the people she had fought so hard to protect began to reclaim their lives. The bruises on her arms and the bandages on her wounds were a painful reminder of everything she had endured, but the sight of the villagers smiling and laughing again made it all worth it. Tabo approached her, his face lined with exhaustion, but also filled with pride. "You did it, Zara," he said softly. "You freed the village." Zara turned to him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "We did it," she corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, Uncle." She looked around at the villagers who had once been under Adisa's control, now working together to clean up the mess left behind by his regime. "But there's still so much work to be done." Tabo nodded. "Yes, but now we can rebuild. Without Adisa's influence hanging over us, the village can finally heal." As Zara and Tabo spoke, Nomusa approached them hesitantly. Her eyes were red from crying, and she looked as though she had not slept all night. "Zara," she began, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want to try to make things right." Zara looked at her friend, seeing the guilt and regret etched into her features. She knew that Nomusa's betrayal had been born out of desperation, manipulated by Adisa's threats. "It will take time to trust again," Zara said quietly, "but if you're willing to help, we can use every hand to rebuild the village." Nomusa's face lit up with relief. Thank you, Zara. I promise I won't let you down again. Zara smiled faintly and placed a hand on Nomusa's shoulder. We've all made mistakes. But now we have a chance to start anew. We'll need your strength to guide the villagers in the right direction. Together, they turned to face the square, where villagers were organizing to clear debris, repair homes, and tend to those still recovering from the illness that had plagued them for so long. As the sun climbed higher into the sky, the village council convened in the square. Chief Adisa, now stripped of his power and bound in chains, was brought before them. His once proud and defiant expression was replaced by one of defeat. The villagers gathered around, eager to hear the council's decision. Zara stood with Tabo and Nomusa at the front of the crowd, watching as the head council elder stepped forward. Chief Adisa, the elder began, his voice strong and clear, you have betrayed the trust of the villagers you swore to protect. You used dark magic, poisoned our water, and brought suffering to your people. The villagers murmured in agreement, their anger and pain clear in their eyes. The elder continued, for your crimes, the council has decided that you will be exiled from Amaju. You will no longer hold any power over this village, and you will leave with nothing. Adisa's face twisted with rage, but he was powerless to change his fate. The villagers cheered as the guards led him away, their spirits lifted by the sight of the man who had oppressed them for so long finally brought low. Zara watched as Adisa was taken away, her heart heavy but relieved. It's finally over, she whispered to herself. With Adisa gone, the villagers turned their attention to rebuilding. Zara and Tabo worked tirelessly, helping to set up a new water filtration system to ensure that the contamination Adisa had caused would no longer harm anyone. Nomusa led groups of villagers in repairing damaged homes and replanting crops that had withered under Adisa's neglect. Zara had never felt more exhausted in her life, but the smiles on the villagers' faces made every ache and bruise worthwhile. The village was coming alive again, and for the first time in years, there was laughter and joy in the air. As Zara walked through the square, she was greeted by grateful villagers who offered their thanks and well wishes. Some of the children she had treated at the clinic ran up to hug her, their small arms wrapped tightly around her legs. She smiled, her heart swelling with love for these people she had once thought she would leave behind forever. But now, she couldn't imagine being anywhere else. The village was her home, and she had finally found her place in it. As the sun began to set, Zara found a quiet spot on the edge of the village, looking out over the rolling hills and the distant forest that had once seemed so ominous. Now it looked peaceful, a symbol of the new beginning she had fought so hard to secure. Tabo joined her, sitting down beside her on the grass. "What's next for you, Zara?" he asked, his voice gentle. Zara placed a hand on her growing belly, a soft smile playing on her lips. "I'm staying here," she said firmly. "This village needs healing, and I'm not going to run away this time. I want my child to grow up in a place that's free, where they can be surrounded by people who love and protect them." Tabo nodded, pride shining in his eyes. "Your father would be proud of you, Zara. You've done more for this village than anyone ever could have imagined." Zara leaned against him, feeling a deep sense of peace settle over her. "I just wish he could be here to see it," she said softly. "But I know he's watching over us." As the stars began to appear in the sky, Zara felt the weight of the past lift from her shoulders. She had faced her fears, confronted the darkness that had haunted her family, and found a way to bring hope back to the people she loved. The next morning, as the village began to stir, Zara stood before the villagers once more. "Today marks the beginning of a new chapter for Amaju," she announced. "Together, we will rebuild, and together, we will make this village a place of safety, prosperity, and love." The villagers cheered, their faces lit with hope. Zara looked out over the crowd and felt a deep sense of pride and gratitude. She had come back to Amaju to find herself, and in the process, she had found something far more valuable, a future worth fighting for. Tabo and Nomusa stood beside her, the three of them united in their commitment to lead the village into a brighter tomorrow. As the villagers dispersed to begin their work, Zara knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. For the first time in her life, Zara felt truly at peace. She had fought for her village, for her family, and for the future of her child. And now, as the sun rose on a new day, she was ready to embrace whatever came next.